Every year, millions of tourists visit the world of Coca-Cola in Atlanta. They watch a theatrical presentation about a vault, armed guards, dramatic lighting. The secret formula protected like nuclear codes. What they don't show you is what made Coca-Cola famous in the first place. It wasn't the taste, it was the drugs. When a morphine-addicted pharmacist invented this drink in 1886, cocaine wasn't just an ingredient, it was the selling point. And here's the part that should make your jaw drop. Coca-Cola still imports over 100 metric tons of coca leaves every single year, still, today. To understand how cocaine ended up in America's favorite soft drink, you need to understand what America looked like after the Civil War. It was a nation of addicts. Between 1861 and 1865, more than 600,000 soldiers died. But the ones who survived often came home with something worse than physical wounds. They came home hooked on morphine. Military doctors had used it liberally during the war. The miracle drug of the era, injected straight into soldiers to kill the agony of amputations, gunshot wounds, dysentery. The problem was simple. Nobody understood addiction yet. Soldiers who'd been given morphine for months in field hospitals returned to civilian life unable to function without it. Doctors called it soldier's disease. By 1900, estimates suggest over 300,000 morphine addicts in America. Those were just the ones counted. This is the world John Stith Pemberton inhabited. Born in 1831 in Knoxville, Georgia, Pemberton was a pharmacist by training and a Confederate soldier by circumstance. He'd fought for the South, earned the rank of lieutenant colonel, and in April 1865, just days before the war ended, he took a saber slash to the chest during the Battle of Columbus. The wound was devastating. The treatment was predictable. Morphine, lots of it. Pemberton survived, but he came out of that war with a dependency that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Like hundreds of thousands of other veterans, he spent years trying to escape the grip of the drug that had saved him. And like many pharmacists of his era, he believed the answer lay somewhere in chemistry. If science had created the problem, science could solve it. Here's where things get wild. And in the 1880s, there was no Food and Drug Administration, no federal oversight of what went into medicines, no requirement to list ingredients. Pharmacies sold products that would land you in prison today, and they did it completely legally. Opium-based syrups for teething babies, heroin tablets for coughs, chloroform drops for insomnia. The pharmacy wasn't a place of healing. It was a chemical free-for-all. And the hottest new wonder drug on the market? Cocaine. Extracted from the coca leaf, cocaine had been isolated in pure form in 1860 by a German chemist named Albert Niemann. Within 2 decades, it had captured the imagination of the Western medical establishment. Doctors prescribed it for everything: depression, toothaches, hay fever. Sigmund Freud wrote glowing papers about its benefits, calling it a magical drug that could cure morphine addiction. The irony was lost on everybody. Trade one addiction for another. They didn't see it that way. Coca leaves had been chewed by indigenous South Americans for centuries. The Incas used them for energy, altitude sickness, religious rituals. When European scientists got hold of the plant, they saw dollar signs. Suddenly, coca wasn't just traditional medicine. It was a commercial goldmine. Walk into any pharmacy in 1885 America, and you'd find coca products everywhere. Coca wines, coca lozenges, coca elixirs, promising to cure fatigue, impotence, nervous exhaustion. The most famous was Vin Mariani, a French coca wine on the market since 1863. Pope Leo XIII endorsed it. Thomas Edison drank it. Queen Victoria was reportedly a fan. If you wanted to seem sophisticated and modern, you consumed coca. John Pemberton watched all of this from his pharmacy in Atlanta. He was still wrestling with his morphine habit, still searching for a cure. And he saw in coca exactly what Freud had seen: a way out. In 1884, he created his first Coca product. He called it Pemberton's French Wine Coca, a direct imitation of Vin Mariani. It combined coca extract with wine and cola nut, creating a potent mix of cocaine, alcohol, and caffeine. He marketed it as a cure for nervous exhaustion, headaches, and morphine addiction. For a brief moment, it seemed like success. Sales were decent, reviews were positive. But then the temperance movement intervened. In 1885, Atlanta and Fulton County voted to go dry. Alcohol was out. Pemberton suddenly had a product that was illegal to sell in his own city. Most businessmen would have given up. Pemberton did something else entirely. He stripped out the wine but kept everything else. The coca, the cola, the cocaine, the caffeine. He mixed it with sugar syrup and carbonated water, and on May 8, 1886, he walked into Jacob's Pharmacy in downtown Atlanta with a jug of dark, syrupy liquid. The pharmacist mixed it with soda water, served it to customers at the fountain. They paid 5 cents a glass. It was marketed as a brain tonic, an intellectual beverage. It promised to cure headaches, relieve exhaustion, calm the nerves. The name came directly from its 2 key ingredients: coca, from the coca leaf; cola, from the cola nut; Coca-Cola. Let that sink in. The most recognized brand name in human history is, at its root, a drug reference. Pemberton didn't know he'd just created a global empire. He was a sick man. Still addicted to morphine. Still struggling financially. He had no head for business. What he had was a formula and a name. Over the next 2 years, desperate for cash, he started selling off portions of his recipe to various business partners. He sold shares to different people, created a tangled mess of ownership that would take years to sort out. By 1888, Pemberton was broke, addicted, and dying. He passed away that August from stomach cancer, likely exacerbated by decades of drug use. He was 57 years old. The formula he left behind was about to fall into very different hands, hands that understood not medicine, but money. A man named Asa Candler was watching, and he saw exactly what Pemberton had been too sick to see. Not a headache cure, not a temperance drink, an empire. Before we go any further, we need to talk about what was actually in that syrup Pemberton carried into Jacob's Pharmacy. Because the name Coca-Cola wasn't just clever marketing, it was a chemical confession. The first ingredient was coca. The coca plant, Erythroxylum coca, grows in the mountain slopes of South America, primarily Peru and Bolivia. For thousands of years, indigenous peoples had chewed its leaves to fight fatigue, suppress hunger, endure the thin air of the Andes. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, they initially dismissed the practice as primitive. Then they noticed something. Workers who chewed coca could labor longer and harder in the brutal silver mines. Suddenly, the colonizers became very interested in this little green leaf. The active compound in coca is cocaine. In 1860, German chemist Albert Niemann isolated it in pure crystalline form. The medical community went wild. Here was a substance that could numb pain, boost energy, elevate mood, all without the obvious stupefying effects of opium. By the 1880s, cocaine was being hailed as a wonder drug across Europe and America. Pharmaceutical companies couldn't manufacture it fast enough. The second key ingredient was cola. The cola nut comes from the cola genus of trees, native to West Africa. Inside its bitter seeds lies a potent dose of caffeine, more concentrated than coffee beans. West African cultures had used cola nuts for centuries in ceremonies and as a stimulant for long journeys. When European traders encountered the nut, they saw commercial potential. By the late 1800s, cola extract was being added to patent medicines across the Western world and marketed as a cure for exhaustion and mental fog. So when Pemberton combined coca and cola, He was mixing two powerful stimulants with centuries of traditional use behind them: cocaine and caffeine. One from the mountains of Peru, one from the forests of Africa. Both legal, both celebrated, both about to be poured into a soda fountain drink. The original Coca-Cola formula contained somewhere between 8 and 9 milligrams of cocaine per glass. That might not sound like much, but consider that people often drank multiple glasses a day. Regular customers were getting meaningful doses of a drug we now classify alongside heroin, and they had no idea. Or maybe they did, and simply didn't care. Cocaine wasn't stigmatized in 1886. It was sophisticated. It was modern. Pemberton marketed his creation as a patent medicine. Ike, which meant almost nothing in terms of regulation. Patent medicines were the Wild West of American commerce. You could claim your product cured cancer, tuberculosis, and impotence, all in the same advertisement, and nobody could stop you. No FDA to demand proof, no FTC to punish false advertising. Just a marketplace of desperate consumers and shameless hucksters. The advertisements for early Coca-Cola read like promises from a snake oil salesman. It was sold as a cure for headaches, a remedy for exhaustion, a tonic for the nerves. One early ad called it the ideal brain tonic. Another promised it would relieve mental and physical exhaustion. The message was clear. Drink this, and your problems will disappear. What the ads didn't mention was why it worked so well. The cocaine did the heavy lifting. Pemberton spent the last 2 years of his life watching his creation gain traction while his own health collapsed. He was still addicted to morphine, still broke. And in a decision that would haunt his descendants, he started selling off his ownership rights to anyone with cash. Enter Asa Griggs Candler. Candler was everything Pemberton was not. Where Pemberton was a dreamer and a tinkerer, Candler was a calculator. Born in 1851 in Villarica, Georgia, Candler had moved to Atlanta as a young man and built a successful pharmaceutical business through sheer relentless hustle. He understood something fundamental about America. The best product doesn't always win. The best marketed product does. Candler first tasted Coca-Cola in 1887 and immediately recognized its potential, not as medicine, as a brand. Over the next few years, he systematically bought up every piece of the Coca-Cola formula he could find. Pemberton had sold shares to multiple people, creating a legal mess. Candler untangled it, sometimes through negotiation, sometimes through aggressive legal maneuvering. By 1891, he owned the formula outright. He'd paid a total of about $2,300. Let that number sink in. $2,300 for what would become the most valuable brand in human history. Today, the Coca-Cola brand alone is valued at over $90 billion. Candler immediately got to work. He understood something revolutionary about consumer products. You weren't just selling a drink. You were selling an experience, an identity, a feeling. He plastered the Coca-Cola logo everywhere: wall calendars, serving trays, clocks, thermometers. If an object could hold an advertisement, Candler put the Coca-Cola script on it. By 1895, he could truthfully claim that Coca-Cola was sold in every state and territory of the United States. But Candler's true genius was the franchise bottling system. In 1899, two Tennessee lawyers named Benjamin Thomas and Joseph Whitehead approached him with an audacious idea. Let them bottle Coca-Cola and sell it themselves. Candler, skeptical that anyone would buy soda outside of a fountain, sold them the bottling rights for the entire United States for exactly $1. It seemed like a throwaway deal. It became the foundation of a global empire. Thomas and Whitehead didn't have the capital to build bottling plants everywhere, so they subdivided their territory, sold franchise rights to local businessmen who would build their own plants and distribute in their own regions. Coca-Cola provided the syrup and the brand. The franchisees provided everything else. It was a model that spread risk, multiplied investment, and scaled faster than any traditional manufacturing approach could have. By 1909, there were over 400 Coca-Cola bottling plants across America. Through all of this expansion, through all of this marketing brilliance, there was something Candler never talked about publicly. The cocaine was still in the formula. Asa Candler didn't just sell soda, he built a system. And that system would become the blueprint for American consumer capitalism. By 1892, Candler had incorporated the Coca-Cola Company with $100,000 in capital. A bold bet on a product that most serious businessmen still dismissed as a pharmacy novelty. But Candler saw what others missed. This wasn't about the liquid in the glass. It was about the feeling in the customer's mind. And feelings could be manufactured just as surely as syrup. His first move was advertising. He approached it with an intensity that bordered on obsession. In 1892 alone, Coca-Cola spent $11,000 on marketing. By 1901, that number had exploded to $100,000. By 1912, over $1 million annually. These were staggering sums for the era. Candler understood something essential. Visibility was everything. If people saw the Coca-Cola name enough times, they would believe it mattered, and eventually, it would. The advertisements themselves were masterpieces of psychological manipulation. Candler targeted women specifically. He recognized that they controlled household purchasing decisions and set social norms. Beautiful women in fashionable dresses were shown sipping Coca-Cola at fountains. The message was aspirational. Drink this, and you too can be elegant, modern, refined. It was among the first lifestyle marketing campaigns in American history, but Candler didn't stop at traditional advertising. He invented promotional merchandising as we know it. Coca-Cola gave away millions of free items emblazoned with its logo, serving trays, calendars, clocks, bookmarks, fans for hot summer days. Anything a person might keep in their home or business became a vehicle for the brand. The goal was saturation. Every American should see the Coca-Cola name multiple times per day, until it became as familiar as their own reflection. The soda fountain network grew relentlessly. Candler dispatched salesmen across the country to convince pharmacists and lunch counter owners to carry Coca-Cola. The pitch was simple. This product sells itself. Just put it on your menu and watch the money come in. By 1895, available in every state. By 1900, in every town with a soda fountain. The red and white logo became as ubiquitous as the American flag. Then came the bottling revolution. When Benjamin Thomas and Joseph Whitehead purchased the bottling rights in 1899 for a single dollar, nobody at Coca-Cola thought it mattered. Soda was a fountain experience. Why would anyone buy it in a bottle? But Thomas and Whitehead understood something Candler didn't. America was changing. People were moving, traveling, working in places without fountains. Bottled soda meant Coca-Cola could follow them anywhere. The franchise model they developed was elegant in its simplicity. Divide the country into territories. Sell the rights to local entrepreneurs who would build their own bottling plants. Coca-Cola headquarters would manufacture the syrup and control the brand. Everything else was delegated. Centralized control with decentralized execution. Capitalism's answer to the problem of scale. The bottlers became Coca-Cola's most fanatical evangelists. They had their own money on the line. Their success depended entirely on the brand's success. And so they marketed aggressively in their territories, placed bottles in every store and restaurant they could reach, defended their turf like warlords. By 1909, the original two-lawyer franchise had spawned over 400 independent bottling operations. The network was self-reinforcing. Each new bottler added capacity, distribution, and marketing power without costing the parent company a dime. Meanwhile, the money flowed upward. Coca-Cola sold syrup to the bottlers at a fixed price. The bottlers could charge whatever the market would bear for the finished product. And the market bore a lot. Margins were fat. Growth was exponential. Candler became one of the richest men in Atlanta. He used that wealth to cement his status in Southern society, bought real estate, donated to churches and universities, became mayor of Atlanta in 1916. The Candler family name became synonymous with civic virtue and business success, all of it built on a drink that still contained cocaine. But the outside world was changing in ways that threatened everything. The progressive era had arrived. Reformers were attacking the excesses of industrial capitalism. Patent medicines were a prime target. Journalists called muckrakers were exposing the frauds and dangers of unregulated drugs. In 1905, Collier's Weekly published a devastating series called The Great American Fraud. It documented how patent medicine manufacturers lied about their products and hooked customers on addictive substances. Public opinion was turning fast. Cocaine specifically was coming under scrutiny. What had once been celebrated as a wonder drug was now being linked to addiction, violence, social decay. The newspapers ran lurid stories about cocaine fiends committing crimes under the drug's influence. Much of this coverage was explicitly racist. It focused on Black Americans and immigrants as supposed cocaine menaces. The drug that had been perfectly respectable when consumed by white middle-class customers was suddenly dangerous when associated with marginalized communities. Coca-Cola found itself in an uncomfortable spotlight. Reformers began asking pointed questions. How much cocaine was in each glass? Was the company deliberately addicting its customers? Were children being drugged without their parents' knowledge? The questions were awkward. The answers were worse. Candler knew he had a problem. The legal landscape was shifting. In 1906, Congress passed the Pure Food and Drug Act, the first federal law regulating what could go into food and medicine. It required accurate labeling and banned adulterated or misbranded products. Cocaine wasn't banned outright, but companies now had to disclose if their products contained it. Suddenly, the ingredient that had made Coca-Cola special was becoming a liability. Candler faced a choice: fight the reformers and risk having his product labeled as a drug, or adapt. Being a pragmatist above all else, he chose adaptation. The year 1903 was supposed to solve everything. Coca-Cola had reformulated. The cocaine was gone, or at least reduced to negligible traces. The company could move forward, clean and respectable. But the past has a way of catching up. And in 1909, it caught up hard. The United States government sued the Coca-Cola Company. The case was officially titled United States versus 40 barrels and 20 kegs of Coca-Cola. That's not a typo. Federal law at the time required the government to sue the product itself, not the company. So 40 barrels and 20 kegs became the defendant in one of the most bizarre and revealing trials in American corporate history. The government's case, Wastro, rested on two claims. First, that Coca-Cola was misbranded because its name promised cocaine that was no longer in the product. Second, that the beverage was adulterated because it contained caffeine, which the government argued was a harmful additive. The irony was thick. After years of quietly containing cocaine, Coca-Cola was now being attacked for not containing cocaine. And the caffeine that nobody had previously cared about was suddenly the villain. The trial took place in Chattanooga, Tennessee in March 1911. It became a media sensation. Newspapers covered every detail. Scientists testified about the effects of caffeine on the human body. Company executives were grilled about the formula's history. For the first time, the inner workings of America's most popular beverage were exposed to public scrutiny. The government brought in expert witnesses who claimed caffeine was poison. They described experiments where rabbits had been injected with massive doses and died. The implication was clear. If caffeine could kill a rabbit, it could harm a child. The testimony was dramatic. It was also scientifically absurd. The doses used in the experiments were hundreds of times higher than anything a human would consume from drinking soda. Still, the spectacle played well in newspapers. Coca-Cola's defense was equally aggressive. The company argued that caffeine was a natural component of the cola nut, therefore not an additive under the law. They brought their own scientists to testify that caffeine in normal doses was harmless. They pointed out that coffee and tea contained caffeine, and nobody was suing them. The whole prosecution, they argued, was government overreach driven by moralizing busybodies. But the most damaging moments came when witnesses discussed the formula's history. The court heard testimony about the original cocaine content. They learned about the 1903 reformulation. They heard the company's own chemists explain the process of decocainization. Details that Coca-Cola had kept carefully hidden were now public record. The jury sided with the government, finding that Coca-Cola was indeed misbranded, but the victory was hollow. The judge overturned the verdict on technical grounds, ruling the caffeine couldn't be considered an added ingredient because it was part of the original formula. The government appealed. The case dragged through the courts for years. In 1916, Coca-Cola finally settled, agreed to reduce the caffeine content slightly and pay a portion of the court costs. A slap on the wrist. But the damage to the company's reputation required management. The trial had aired too much dirty laundry. The cocaine history was now documented in court records and newspaper archives. Coca-Cola needed a new strategy, one that would bury the past and construct a more wholesome image for the future. The answer was mythology. Asa Candler and his successors realized something powerful. Secrecy itself could be a marketing tool. If the formula was mysterious, it was valuable. If it was valuable, it was worth protecting. If it was worth protecting, it must be special. The logic was circular, but devastatingly effective. Coca-Cola began cultivating legends about the recipe's secrecy. Only 2 executives knew the complete formula. They were never allowed to travel on the same plane. The recipe was locked in a bank vault, could only be accessed with board approval. These stories spread through the press and became part of American folklore. Whether any of it was true hardly mattered. The point was to redirect attention. Instead of asking what was in Coca-Cola, people would ask about the mystery of what was in Coca-Cola. A subtle but crucial shift. The secret formula became the brand's defining feature, more important than any ingredient. The strategy worked brilliantly. As decades passed, fewer people remembered the cocaine era. New generations grew up thinking of Coca-Cola as wholesome refreshment their parents and grandparents had enjoyed. The soda became associated with American values, happiness, innocent pleasure. The drug-laced origins faded into obscurity. Meanwhile, the legal landscape continued to evolve. The Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1914 imposed strict regulations on cocaine and opiates. E-cocaine was no longer something you could casually put in a consumer product. The door that Pemberton had walked through in 1886 was now permanently closed. Any company wanting to use coca leaves would need special government permission. Coca-Cola found a way. In the years following the Harrison Act, the company established a relationship with a processing facility that could legally handle coca leaves. The arrangement was quiet, carefully managed, completely invisible to the public. Coca-Cola would continue using coca leaf extract in its formula, but the cocaine would be removed before it ever reached Atlanta. The distinctive flavor would remain. The drug would not. This arrangement required an exemption from federal drug enforcement. Coca-Cola got one. The details of how the company secured this privilege are murky. And lobbying certainly played a role. Political connections helped. The company had become so economically important, so woven into American life, that the government was willing to accommodate its needs. Too big to be treated like an ordinary business. Too culturally significant to be held to ordinary rules. By the 1920s, the transition was complete. Coca-Cola was America's drink, pure and simple. The factories hummed, the bottlers multiplied, the advertisements promised happiness, and somewhere in New Jersey, a facility processed coca leaves in industrial quantities, stripping out the cocaine, sending the sanitized extract south to Georgia. Nobody asked questions. Nobody wanted to know. The cocaine era was buried, locked away like the formula itself, hidden behind vault doors and corporate smiles. The most successful rebranding in American history was complete. Here's where the story takes a turn that sounds like conspiracy theory but is documented fact. If Coca-Cola removed cocaine from its formula in 1903, why does the company still need coca leaves? The answer leads to a nondescript industrial facility in New Jersey that most Americans have never heard of. And what happens inside that facility will make you question everything you thought you knew about the war on drugs. The Stepan Company operates a chemical processing plant in Maywood, New Jersey. It sits in an industrial zone about 15 miles from Manhattan, surrounded by warehouses and manufacturing facilities. Nothing about its exterior suggests anything unusual. But inside those walls, workers process a substance that would land ordinary Americans in federal prison. Coca leaves, tons of them, every single year. And Stepan is the only company in the United States with a federal license to import and process coca leaves. The license comes from the Drug Enforcement Administration, the same agency that arrests people for cocaine possession. While the DEA wages war on coca in South America, burning fields, and extraditing traffickers, it simultaneously issues permits allowing Stepan to import the raw material for cocaine production. The contradiction is breathtaking. The numbers are staggering. According to documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests, Stepan imports over 100 metric tons of coca leaves annually. That's 220,000 pounds of the same plant that fuels the global cocaine trade. The leaves arrive from Peru, carefully documented, legally transported, delivered to New Jersey for processing. What happens next is a two-step operation. First, Stepan extracts the cocaine alkaloid from the coca leaves. This is the same process that illegal labs perform in jungle hideouts across Colombia and Bolivia. The difference is that Stepan does it with government permission, in a regulated facility, with meticulous record-keeping. The extracted cocaine is pharmaceutical grade, purer than anything on the street. And here's the thing. The cocaine doesn't disappear. It gets sold. Stepan's primary customer for the extracted cocaine is Mallinckrodt Incorporated, a pharmaceutical company based in St. Louis. Mallinckrodt is one of the few manufacturers licensed to produce cocaine for medical use. That's right, cocaine is still a legal medicine in the United States. It's classified as a Schedule II controlled substance, which means it has recognized medical applications despite its high potential for abuse. Doctors use it as a topical anesthetic for certain ear, nose, and throat procedures. The cocaine extracted from Coca-Cola's coca leaves ends up in hospital operating rooms across America. But here's the part that matters for our story. After the cocaine is removed, what remains is a decocainized coca extract. Stepan calls it merchandise number 5. And merchandise number 5 goes straight to the Coca-Cola Company in Atlanta. This is the ingredient that gives Coca-Cola its distinctive flavor, not the sugar, not the caffeine, not the mysterious natural flavors listed on the label. It's the essence of coca. Stripped of its psychoactive properties but retaining the taste compounds that have defined the beverage since 1886. Let that sink in. When you drink a Coca-Cola, you're consuming a processed derivative of the same plant used to make crack cocaine. The company just found a legal way to use it. The arrangement has been in place for decades, largely invisible to the public. Coca-Cola has never voluntarily discussed it. When journalists have asked questions, the company offers carefully worded non-answers. Yes, they use coca leaf extract. No, there's no cocaine in the final product. Beyond that, no comment. The secrecy is absolute. The scale of the operation deserves emphasis. 100 metric tons of coca leaves per year, enough to produce a significant quantity of cocaine for Mallinckrodt's medical products, with plenty of decocainized extract left over for the world's largest beverage company. The supply chain runs from Peruvian highlands to New Jersey processing facilities, to pharmaceutical labs, to soda bottling plants, entirely legal, entirely documented, entirely hidden from ordinary consumers. Consider what this means. Coca-Cola has a permanent exemption from America's drug laws. While millions of Americans have been arrested, prosecuted, and imprisoned for cocaine offenses, a single corporation maintains a legal monopoly on coca leaf imports. The same federal government that spends billions fighting coca cultivation in South America grants special permission for this cultivation to supply an American soft drink. The hypocrisy doesn't require interpretation, it announces itself. The legal framework that permits this arrangement dates back to the early 20th century. When the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1914 imposed controls on cocaine, Coca-Cola was already too important to ignore. The company had lobbyists, it had political connections, it had an argument that resonated with regulators. Coca-Cola was an American institution. Denying it access to its traditional ingredients would destroy a beloved brand. Special provisions were written to allow licensed processors to handle coca leaves for approved purposes. Stepan eventually became that licensed processor. The DEA maintains strict oversight of the operation. Every shipment of coca leaves is tracked. Every ounce of extracted cocaine is accounted for. The facility undergoes regular inspections. On paper, it's a model of regulatory compliance. In practice, it's a monument to corporate exceptionalism. The rules that apply to everyone else don't apply to Coca-Cola. Journalists have tried to investigate. In 1988, the New York Times published an article revealing the Stepan arrangement. The story caused a brief stir before fading from public consciousness. In 2009, a book called Cocaine by Dominic Streetfield explored the connection in detail. Various documentaries have touched on it, but somehow the information never sticks. It's too strange, too contradictory to fit neatly into public understanding. People hear it, shrug, and forget. Coca-Cola's official position is that the coca extract is necessary for the product's distinctive taste. Remove it, and Coca-Cola wouldn't be Coca-Cola anymore. The formula demands it. Customers expect it. Tradition requires it. This may even be true. But the implication is extraordinary. The world's most valuable brand depends on a controlled substance processed by a single authorized facility. The entire operation hangs by a thread of government permission. That permission could theoretically be revoked at any time. It hasn't been. It won't be. Let's put the Coca-Cola arrangement in context. Because when you zoom out and look at America's relationship with cocaine, the absurdity becomes almost unbearable. The United States has spent over $1 trillion fighting the war on drugs since Richard Nixon declared it in 1971. Hundreds of billions have gone specifically toward eradicating coca cultivation in South America. American military advisors train Colombian soldiers. American helicopters spray herbicides on Peruvian fields. American agents work with local police to burn crops and arrest farmers. The stated goal is to eliminate the coca plant from the Western Hemisphere. Meanwhile, back in New Jersey, a factory legally imports 100 metric tons of that same plant every year to make soda flavoring. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. We have militarized an entire continent's worth of drug policy while simultaneously carving out a corporate exemption. Peasant farmers in Bolivia face prosecution for growing the same crop that Stepan processes with government blessing. The only difference is who's doing the growing and who's doing the buying. Consider the human cost of this contradiction. Since 1980, over 45 million Americans have been arrested on drug charges. Millions have served prison sentences. Entire communities, particularly Black and Latino communities, have been devastated by aggressive enforcement. The collateral damage includes broken families, lost jobs, generational trauma that compounds over decades. For cocaine specifically, mandatory minimum sentences have meant years behind bars for possession of small amounts. The racial disparities are documented and damning. Black Americans are arrested for drug offenses at nearly 4 times the rate of white Americans, despite similar usage rates. And through all of this, Coca-Cola quietly imports its coca leaves, extracts the cocaine, sells it to pharmaceutical companies, uses the remainder to flavor children's beverages. The company has never faced criminal prosecution. No executive has done prison time. The arrangement continues year after year, decade after decade, completely insulated from the legal machinery that destroys ordinary lives. This isn't about whether Coca-Cola is doing anything wrong in the narrow legal sense. They have permits. They follow regulations. Every gram of cocaine is accounted for. The operation is technically compliant. But technical compliance misses the point entirely. The point is that the system was designed to accommodate them while crushing everyone else. How did this happen? Follow the money. Coca-Cola is one of the most politically connected corporations in America. The company has spent millions on lobbying over the decades. Its executives have served in government positions. Its PACs have donated to politicians of both parties. When regulatory questions arise, Coca-Cola has access to lawmakers that ordinary citizens can only dream of. The DEA exemption that allows Stepan to operate didn't emerge from nowhere. It was cultivated, protected, maintained through systematic influence. The regulatory capture runs deep. Consider that the specific provisions allowing licensed coca processing have remained essentially unchanged for over a century. Administrations come and go. Drug policies shift. When enforcement priorities change. But the Coca-Cola exemption persists, untouched by the political winds that batter everything else. It's become infrastructure, as permanent and invisible as a highway or a power line. There's also a cultural dimension. Coca-Cola has wrapped itself so thoroughly in American identity that criticizing it feels almost unpatriotic. The brand sponsored Olympic teams and Super Bowl halftime shows. It's synonymous with Christmas through decades of Santa Claus advertising. Soldiers drank it during World War II, supplied by the company at subsidized rates. Attacking Coca-Cola's coca supply feels like attacking America itself. And that's not an accident. That's brand strategy executed over 140 years. The secrecy serves multiple functions. Obviously, it protects competitive advantage. But more importantly, it prevents public examination of the arrangement's implications. If Americans fully understood that their favorite soft drink company operates in the legal coca trade while their neighbors go to prison for the same plant, there might be uncomfortable questions. Questions about equality under the law. Questions about whose interests the drug war really serves. Questions about whether prohibition is about public health or social control. Coca-Cola's position is that they're simply following the law as written. And they are. But they also helped write the law. They lobbied for the exemptions they now enjoy. They built the political relationships that maintain those exemptions. Compliance isn't passive when you've shaped the rules to fit your needs. The pharmaceutical angle adds another layer of irony. And cocaine extracted from Coca-Cola's coca leaves ends up in hospitals as a legal anesthetic. Doctors administer it to patients during surgery. It's considered safe and effective when used under medical supervision. Yet the same substance, derived from the same plant, produces a felony when sold on a street corner. The molecule doesn't change, only the context changes. And context in America is determined by wealth and access. Some defenders argue that the Stepan arrangement is actually efficient. It allows the United States to maintain a domestic supply of pharmaceutical cocaine without relying on foreign processors. The decocainized extract provides a natural flavoring that consumers expect. Everyone wins. This argument has a certain logic, but it ignores the bodies stacked up by the drug war. It ignores the families torn apart. It ignores the racial injustice baked into enforcement. It treats those outcomes as externalities while celebrating the convenience of legal coca processing for corporations. The truth is uncomfortable. America doesn't have a principled objection to cocaine. It has a selective objection. Cocaine for medicine is fine. Cocaine-derived flavoring for soda is fine. Cocaine for recreational use by ordinary people, especially poor people, especially people of color, is a crime worthy of imprisonment. The drug itself is morally neutral. What matters is who benefits and who pays the price. Coca-Cola will never acknowledge this contradiction. The company has mastered the art of deflection. Their public relations machinery redirects attention toward philanthropy, sustainability initiatives, community partnerships. The World of Coca-Cola Museum in Atlanta celebrates the brand's history while carefully editing out the inconvenient parts. The cocaine era is a footnote, if mentioned at all. The Stepan arrangement is invisible. The vault gets all the attention, and that's exactly how they want it. The vault is the distraction. The mystery is the misdirection. While everyone wonders about the secret formula, nobody asks about the secret supply chain. The greatest trick Coca-Cola ever pulled was convincing the world that the recipe matters more than the reality. Visit the World of Coca-Cola Museum in Atlanta, and you'll encounter one of the most elaborate pieces of corporate theater ever constructed. The vault exhibit sits at the heart of the experience, a massive steel door guarded by security personnel, surrounded by dramatic lighting and reverential silence. Visitors are invited to approach the sacred chamber where the secret formula supposedly rests, protected from prying eyes for over a century. It's magnificent. It's also almost entirely performance. The formula has been published multiple times. In 1979, a book called Big Secrets by William Poundstone included a version obtained from historical documents. In 1993, Mark Pendergast's For God, Country, and Coca-Cola revealed another iteration. In 2011, in the radio program This American Life claimed to have found the original recipe in an old newspaper article from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The measurements differ slightly between versions, but the basic components are well documented: sugar, caramel, caffeine, phosphoric acid, vanilla, lime juice, citric acid, and that mysterious coca extract, merchandise number 5, shipped from New Jersey. If you wanted to reverse engineer Coca-Cola, you could get close enough that most consumers wouldn't notice the difference. Generic colas already exist by the dozens. The chemistry isn't particularly complex. What competitors can't replicate is the brand equity, the cultural positioning, the century plus of market dominance. The secret isn't in the syrup, it's in the story. So what is the vault really protecting? Not a recipe. Any competent food scientist could approximate that. The vault protects the mythology. It protects the idea that Coca-Cola is special, irreplaceable, worthy of reverence. The theatrical secrecy serves the same function as a magician's cabinet. It creates wonder by suggesting hidden depths. The audience knows, on some level, that it's illusion, but they play along because the illusion is enjoyable. More cynically, the secrecy protects the history. As long as everyone focuses on the mysterious formula, nobody asks about the cocaine era. Nobody asks about the step-on arrangement. Nobody asks about the drug war exemptions. The vault is a monument to misdirection, and it works perfectly. The lessons from this story cut deep. They're not just about Coca-Cola, they're about how American capitalism actually functions. Lesson 1. Secrecy is power. Coca-Cola discovered early that controlling information was as valuable as controlling product. The less people know, the more they project. They imagine the formula is precious. The company is special. The brand deserves loyalty. Transparency would shatter the mystique. So transparency is avoided at all costs. Every modern corporation has learned this lesson, from tech companies hiding their algorithms to pharmaceutical firms obscuring their pricing. Secrecy has become standard operating procedure. The less the public understands, the harder it is to hold anyone accountable. Lesson 2. Money buys exemptions. Coca-Cola operates in the coca trade because they could afford to make it legal. Lobbying, political donations, strategic relationships with regulators. The company shaped the rules to fit its needs. It then followed those rules scrupulously. This is regulatory capture in its purest form. The entities being regulated become powerful enough to dictate the terms of their regulation. It happens in every industry. Banks write banking rules. Oil companies write environmental rules. Pharmaceutical giants write drug approval rules. Coca-Cola simply got there first with Coca. Lesson 3. History can be erased. The cocaine origins of Coca-Cola are documented fact, available to anyone who looks. Yet most Americans don't know. The company has successfully buried its own past through decades of rebranding, advertising, and cultural positioning. The wholesome family image has completely eclipsed the patent medicine reality. This demonstrates something uncomfortable about collective memory. It's malleable. With enough time and enough money, corporations can rewrite their own narratives. The past doesn't automatically persist. It has to be preserved. And preservation requires effort that most people don't make. Lesson 4. The law is not neutral. Coca-Cola's exemption from drug laws isn't an accident or a loophole. It's a deliberate construction that reveals whose interests the legal system serves. When powerful corporations need something, they get it. When ordinary people need the same thing, they get prison. The law appears equal on paper while producing wildly unequal outcomes in practice. This isn't a bug, it's a feature. The American legal system has always accommodated wealth while punishing poverty. Coca-Cola's Coca arrangement is simply a particularly stark example. Lesson 5. Branding outlasts everything. John Pemberton died broke and addicted. Asa Candler built an empire through marketing genius. The product itself has changed repeatedly over 140 years. Sugar replaced cocaine as the main attraction. High fructose corn syrup replaced sugar in many markets. The formula has been tweaked, adjusted, reformulated. Yet the brand persists, more valuable than ever. What Coca-Cola proves is that consumer loyalty attaches to symbols, not substances. The red and white logo, the script lettering, the contour bottle. These visual elements carry more commercial weight than anything in the liquid itself. Products are ephemeral. Brands are immortal. So where does this leave us? Standing in front of a vault that protects nothing. Drinking a beverage derived from a plant that imprisons millions. Celebrating a brand built on drugs and transformed through propaganda. The story of Coca-Cola is the story of American capitalism itself. Innovation exploited by marketers. Regulation captured by the regulated. History sanitized by the victors. Mythology substituted for truth. The next time you see that red and white logo, remember what it represents. A morphine-addicted Confederate veteran mixing cocaine in an Atlanta pharmacy. A shrewd businessman buying an empire for $2,300. Spent coca leaves and secret formulas. Tonnage of coca entering New Jersey while farmers are arrested in Bolivia. Children drinking the residue of the drug war's greatest contradiction. The formula isn't secret. The history is. And now you know. That vault in Atlanta will keep drawing crowds. The security guards will keep performing their roles. Tourists will keep taking photos, marveling at the mystery. Coca-Cola will keep selling billions of servings worldwide, the most recognized brand in human history. Nothing in this story will change that. But maybe next time you drink one, you'll taste something different. Not the sugar or the caffeine or the mysterious natural flavors. Something older, something darker. The ghost of a drug that built an empire and then vanished into corporate mythology, leaving only the faintest trace. A name, Coca-Cola. A confession hidden in plain sight for 140 years.